Perfect. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm in the Netherlands, so for me it's late afternoon. I am Walter Heck. I'm talking to you today as CTO of Hallucination, and I am talking to you about how we built in documentation search into our RAG product, and I'll show you some of the things that we've done to make it easy to ask our product questions, but also ask questions about the capabilities of the product. Let me see. Yes. So we'll talk a little bit about RAG. I've seen some of the previous presentations, so there's been quite a bit of opinions on RAG already. For us, it's working quite well, actually. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how we are doing RAG, what we're using it for. I'll talk a little bit about the classification model that we have in order to get a split between the types of different questions that we want to be asking. We want to discuss a little bit how we are updating the freshness of the documentation in our vector database, and how things work in a production environment. There have been quite a few sessions about AI and RAG in general already. I was not necessarily expecting to already have see that you have already seen so much about RAG, but just really quickly, what RAG really does is when you are asking, for instance, a question to an LLM and you're using RAG, instead of asking the question straight up to the LLM, first you go and look in an external body of work for extra context to that question, ideally something that already answers that has the answer of the question in it, and you send that context as well as the question to your LLM, which the LLM is then only responsible for extracting the actual answer to the question from the context, which could be a whole document. So if you look here in the screenshot as an example, what are the rules for attendance for Stars Hollow? If that's the question, we go and look into our content, and we find eventually a document that's the Stars Hollow Enterprises Employee Handbook. And inside there is text about attendance requirements, the policy for it. So we send the original question, what are the rules for attendance for Stars Hollow, together with the actual handbook to the LLM, and let the LLM come up with the answer. And there's a couple of benefits to using RAG that really help in the case of documentation, considering we want to be as correct as possible. One of them is that it minimizes hallucinations, because the LLM is only responsible for linguistically extracting the answer from the document that we have. The answer is actually already in there, so it doesn't need to come up with an answer, and that usually leads to very little hallucinations. Depends a little bit on the specific situation, but yeah. The other things it allows you to do is that it allows you to surface the reasoning, aka why is this the answer to your question, which for many users is really useful to have. And you can cite the sources, because your RAG pipeline actually retrieved the context for the question, and so it knows already in which source the answer to your question is hiding. I see two people in the chat catching the Gilmore Girls reference. It is 100% Gilmore Girls references. I needed a name for our project, And I thought, okay, we want to do a lot of talking. And then I thought about Rory Gilmore from the Gilmore Girls, who talks a lot. So the project was named Lorelai. And then from there on, it seemed like a lot of fun to generate test documentation that has a little bit of a wink to other people, or to Gilmore Girls. So in RAG, generally you have a two-step approach. One is indexing the corpus of data that you want to later answer questions about. And in our case, this is in a vector database, but earlier you saw how to do it in a graph database. It can be basically any place, as long as when you're querying in the second step, you are able to retrieve context that is relevant to the question that you're hoping to answer. And actually, these two steps are not necessarily needed to be happening at the same time. So the indexing can happen, for instance, nightly or hourly, depending on how fresh your data needs to be, or monthly if it doesn't change much. And querying the vector database actually happens on every query, on every question retrieval. Yeah, these two steps are important, and to show you a little bit with a simple sequence diagram, the indexing process, in our case it's a worker process, fetches documents from the original source. In Lorelai we support Google Drive and Slack as data sources. So we retrieve documents from those sources. Then using what is called an embedding algorithm, you generate embeddings, and an embedding is a vector representation of the meaning of the text or the semantics of the text that you pass it. There are many different embedding algorithms. The ones by OpenAI are at the moment some of the leading ones when it comes to retaining as much meaning as possible, and also doing things like multilingual stuff. We're based in the Netherlands, so we have to deal with Dutch and English language, for instance. And the OpenAI embeddings are some of the best when it comes to multilingual stuff. The embeddings API just returns a vector representation of your text, and then in our case we use Pinecone. In Pinecone you store this vector with some metadata that explains what is in this vector, that explains, for instance, what the original document name was, so that when you retrieve a vector later, you can very easily determine what the actual original document was. And we store those vectors into the vector database, and then basically we get a long database with vector representations of our original text. Once that is done, the indexing is done, and we can, at the moment that we want to, ask questions, we can look at a similar sequence diagram. The user submits a question. The question gets embedded with the same embedding algorithm as we used for the original documents. We then get a vector representation of the question. We send the vector to Pinecone, and one of the most basic ways is to find what is called the nearest neighbors, the vectors that are closest to the vector that we're sending it. And normally you retrieve maybe a top 10 or a top 20. And in that way, and then you look at those top 10 or top 20 and determine further which ones are actually the most relevant for the question that is being asked. You look at what the original data was that this vector represents that you just selected, and you retrieve the original text, and then send that together with the question to your language model, in our case OpenAI usually, and the model only has to say, okay, given this I don't know, Stars Hollow Enterprise Handbook and the question, what's the dress policy, here is your answer. We do some parsing on that and then return the answer to the end user with citations and reasoning about it. There's a question, how does it handle potentially obsolete content? As in, what would happen if the handbook you've mentioned had different versions from different years? Would it know which version to use? There are, once you retrieve the vectors, you can do some smart things. One of them is a recency selection, which means that let's say you retrieve a vector and it turns out that actually it's a vector from an older version of the handbook. You can just say, okay, this is an older version. Let's take the newest version and send the content of the newest version of the handbook to the language model. So in between this step here, return relevant chunks and send prompt with context, you can do additional processing. And for instance, doing recency checks is good. If you have, for instance, results that are of different ages, but not of the same document, you can also say, okay, this is the newest answer. So this happens a lot when you have, for instance, Slack messages. Newer Slack messages are more likely to be the correct context than older Slack messages. So you can do a recency check there as well. So for us, we write our documentation in Markdown. We simply have the luck that we started our tool after we realized that Markdown is super great for LLMs to understand. So the documentation is written in Markdown, and we generate a web interface from it using a tool called mkdocs, which makes it, it's a fairly basic website representation, but you can make some adjustments. You can add a search and a bunch of different things like dark and light settings and all that kind of jazz. And it supports formatting and images and all the rest of what you want in basic documentation. And what we do is when the documentation changes, this is just stored in GitHub. So when someone makes a change to the documentation, we chunk that documentation. We send it to the LLM. We send it to the vector database through the embeddings, and we can do a refresh of the data in quite a short amount of time. This will of course increase once you have more documentation, but by then we can also be much more selective on which documentation you're re-indexing and sending back to the vector database. So because we maintain metadata parameters on each vector, we can very clearly see which vector belongs to which document. So if only a single file changed or a few files changed in the Git history, we can see, okay, these files changed. So we retrieve those vectors and update them to new versions. And that way you can do selective refreshes as well. Did we look at, there's a question, did we look at different options for the vector database? We did. At the time when we started about 2 years ago, Pinecone was already having some quite nice functionality. And even today, they are fast, flexible. They're introducing many changes that make the product better and better over time. And in general, it's just been quite a pleasure to use it. The only thing is that you can't host it offline. So for that, we've been looking at Weaviate to support that. But back when we were making the choice, the only really production-ready vector databases that were out there was Pinecone. By now, You can also look at, for instance, Postgres has an extension called PG Vector, which means that you can use your standard Postgres database. Anyway, back on the story. So one of the things that I think is quite nice that we have, if you look at these two screenshots carefully, on the left, you see that the user is asking a question. The user is, by the way, a picture of my 9-month-old daughter. So she's extremely cute and makes me very happy every time I test our product. But on the left, we are looking at a question, the answer to which is actually in the data that the user indexed. And on the right, we are asking a question that isn't answerable by the data that we indexed, but it's actually answerable by the documentation of the product. And so one of the challenges that we had to solve was to be able to differentiate between these two types of questions in order to deliver a seamless experience to the end user. And we looked at a couple of different things. Originally, we tried to train a verification model, which worked actually quite well. It was lightning fast, but we realized that every time when we needed to make some kind of tweak to the classification, we needed to ask our machine learning engineer to spend time on it. He needed to run tests, do retraining, test the retraining, make sure that everything was solved, etc., etc. And actually, we settled on, and then for fun, actually, at some point, we did a comparison. Like, okay, what if we just asked an LLM for classification? And then it turns out that yes, it's about 10x slower, so it takes half a second instead of 50 milliseconds. But half a second in the grander scheme of things is actually quite okay, and it's extremely adjustable. If I realize that I need to change the classification, it's a matter of changing the prompt for the classifier, and we can support new use cases. So that makes it super simple. So in order to do searches, before we send the question to the actual pinecone situation and retrieve the actual context, the first thing is we make a round trip to the language model with a classification question. So this basically says, given this question, and the previous question and answer, which class of question is this? And we support one of 5 different classes. I'll show you in a minute which 5 we currently support. The prompt classifier asks the LLM, okay, can you give me the classification for this question? And we return that label back to, actually not the user, this is incorrect, but from the web UI, we then use that classification to determine how we're going to answer the actual question from the user. So this is kind of a pre-processing step that we take in order to determine how we're going to answer the question. As I said, we support 5 different classes at the moment. This might become more or less over time as we go along, but at the moment, the 5 different classes that we support are conversational, error, meta model, metadata, and informational. And each of these has a different use case. I'll focus only on the meta model and informational here, but to quickly explain, the conversational classification comes in when someone says, hello, without actually asking a question. We see that especially during new user onboarding, a lot of people are just saying hello or how are you or whatever. And we don't need to spend or waste the compute to go and find an answer to such a question. But B, it will be super weird if we try and go and find an answer to hello in the documentation, while really the only response that we need to say is, hey, how are you? Hey, how are you doing? So that's conversational. Error is for when a user just enters gibberish that doesn't make any sense. So the correct response to that is, I didn't understand. Can you please explain what it is that you want to do? Meta model and informational I'll get to in a minute. And metadata is when a user asks questions about the data that has been indexed, not about content of that data, but more about the meta of that data. So for instance, how many PDFs do you have access to, or when was the last time you indexed this or that document? Those questions go to the metadata classifier. Meta model, on the other hand, as I said, is used when the user is asking questions about Lorelai, about what it can do, about integrations we have with different tools, and it answers questions there. And informational is when they're asking actual questions that have an answer that lies in their data. And then we route it to different retrievers. So when the end-to-end flow is that the user asks a question, we classify it, then either it goes to the meta model where we search the documentation vector database, and if it's an informational question, we do the normal vector search in our RAG pipeline. And then we post-process the return, and to the user it looks exactly the same whether they asked a question about the capabilities of our tool or about the data that they indexed, leading to a nice end-user experience. Key takeaways: RAG gives accurate source-backed answers. The key thing to understand here that RAG is a very wide concept. So in our case, we're using vector databases. We're also doing a hybrid search with a keyword-based hybrid search. Pinecone supports that out of the box. But you can also add graph RAG to it, or you can add lots of different types of RAG to it. It all depends on what your requirements are and how much computational availability you have, et cetera, et cetera. The classification prompt is something that really changed how nicely the model responds to not just a simple question from a user about the data they index, but to other things. And the automated indexing that we have on the documentation repository makes sure that whatever answers whatever questions a person asks about the version of our tool, they get the correct answer. And question classification makes sure that we enable multiple retrieval strategies. We will probably add more complex things to this later on when people start asking different types of questions. So if you look at this question, what are the rules for attendance for Stars Hollow? The answer to this question is actually in a single document, namely the Stars Hollow Enterprise Employee Handbook. But if we start asking questions like, what are the resumes of the last 10 people who applied for a job with us? I don't know, something like that. The answers are actually in multiple documents. So a vector search with a single result won't actually work that well anymore. But we already have some proof of concept code to work with such more complex questions.